I like that song. Thank you, James. Turn with me. Matthew chapter 20. Today we're talking about Grumblers Anonymous. How do I get it on the screen here, James? Grumblers Anonymous. Matthew chapter 20. The Bible says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, 'Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?' 'Because no one is hired,' us," they answered. He said to them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard.'" Verse 8. When the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us and who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the ones who were hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Now I'd like to do something a little different today in the message presentation. Would it be all right if I just preach to me and y'all just kind of sit in the room and listen? I mean, if I make this first person rather than second person, that's what I'd like to do. So don't be too hard on me. I got problems, all right? I know I got them. But I do want the scripture to correct some of them this morning as I work through this. I was born in a West Texas town on a hot summer's day, literally no air conditioning, 1959. Mama was hot. I was born in the greatest country on the planet. Now, if you're born in Texas, they think they're their own country. They're not, but they think they are. So, one of the greatest country on the planet. I have been cared for, fed, and educated. I have been blessed with exceptional health. Why then do I grumble? Stop grumbling, Mike. You see what happens when you play and I play the comparison game? The answer is simple. I lose because I focus on the wrong things. I begin to grumble, and I grumble against God. Grumbling is a particularly dangerous sin for believers. The dictionary offers 3 definitions for the word grumble: to show one's unhappiness or critical attitude, to make complaining remarks or noises under one's breath, or to murmur or mutter in discontent or complain sullenly. And I have a graduate degree in complaining sullenly. I can swallow up like a frog. I know that. I connect with these definitions. I smile when I hear about the success of someone close, but sometimes under my breath, I complain. The Bible has a lot to say about grumbling, Mike, particularly when it comes to the example of the children of Israel in the wilderness who grumbled against Moses. They grumbled because they didn't have enough water. They grumbled because they didn't like the wilderness. They grumbled because they thought Moses was a bad leader. They grumbled because they missed Egypt. They grumbled because they weren't in the promised land. They grumbled because they thought God had let them down. The Bible says it this way. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" The whole congregations of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. But the people thirsted for water, and they grumbled against Moses and said, "Why now have you brought us from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness." 1 Corinthians says, "Nor grumble as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer." Don't grumble, James says, brothers, against one another, so that you won't be judged. So I've got 3 points to say to myself this morning. First of all, how do I spot a grumbler? First, I grumble because I'm not satisfied with what I have. If it's money, I never have enough. If it's a home, somebody else has a nicer one. If it's grades in school and A was a disappointment, I have a PhD in nitpicking. I'm pretty good at it. Second, how to spot a grumbler. I always have an excuse. You ask me why I don't buy a new car. Well, the interest rates are too high. Times like this, when the interest rates are low, I'll say, well, I don't like the shape of the car. It's not pretty to me. Ask me again, I say it costs too much. Ask me again, I say new cars are a ripoff. And you say, well then, why don't you buy a used car? And I say, why would I want to buy somebody else's problems? Ask me why I don't fix up the cars that I have. And I say, that's throwing away good money after bad money. You see, I always have an excuse. And if I fixed up the cars that I had, then how could I grumble because the cars I had break down? I have to leave them like that. So let's say you spot a grumbler. Just look at me. Not satisfied with what I have, and I always find an excuse. Secondly, when I look at these grumbling farm workers, I'm looking in a mirror. Jesus told this parable. Now, the parable is like the Father in heaven, but, parables always break down. There's not an exact representation. God in heaven is greater than any story you can tell about it. Heaven is greater than anything you can dream up about it. Excuse me. So, Jesus is telling this story to help me understand who I am. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. In order to understand the story, I need to know the facts about the landowner. You see, this is a huge estate. Now, I don't mean hundreds of acres. Don't get confused with that. This is one of them West Texas ranches that you can ride for days and still be on that property. I mean, it's a huge spread. So knowing that, you have to know that the landowner needed many workers. Harvest time was a time of essence. He can't wait. He must have help now. He has the resources to hire many workers. So 2 facts I have to know about the landowner. And as Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like this master. So the kingdom of heaven is like that. We have to know about God. We have to know about the landowner. That there was plenty of work. And that he had lots of money. So I know that about him now. Nothing else makes sense to me in this story unless you understand he has plenty of work and lots of resources and will pay you for doing the work. The marketplace is where the underemployed or the unemployed would go. I hire day laborers on a regular basis. If you've got a green card, you can work. I'll work. Today it's not downtown, it's over in Bellwood. If you've not been through Bellwood, there are several corners where people like to stand and gather. The ones who are really industrious are there when the sun comes up. Then there's some others come out about 9 o'clock, they like to sleep in. There's some that come out about lunchtime. There's some that come out in the afternoon. I'm telling you, it's just like it is in the Bible. But these men go to the marketplace and wait for somebody to offer them a job. If nobody offers them a job, they're just idle all day long. The men in this story that Jesus is telling have nothing to do with their own. No jobs and no prospect of a job. The outlook is bleak until the landowner comes along. It's not as if they have a job and the landowner came along and lured them away from their job to a better paying job. That's not the situation. They had no job, no money, no hope. Anything that happens to them is a blessing. As we study the story, we can see at least 5 groups. First, there are the guys who were there at 6 a.m. There's much to be said on their behalf, isn't there? They were industrious. They were ready to go to work. That's good. They negotiated their wages. Awesome. They were hired first. They contracted to do a day's work for a day's pay. That's good because it was a normal day's pay then. What's the minimum wage now? $7.25, $7.50? I don't ever pay $7.25. I mean, I wouldn't even stop to try to hire you folks going to pay you that. That's an insult. So I always pay more than that. And you know, nobody's ever mad at me for paying them more. It's amazing how, when you're generous, how that works out. So these guys agreed to work, and those guys will negotiate with you standing there at the truck. They'll negotiate, they'll work all that out. But they knew that it was a good day's work for a good day's pay. Second group were the workers that show up about 9 o'clock. There's still work to be done. That's good. They were there. They were really ready, willing, and able. They were offered a job that was good. The landowner only made them the promise to pay them what was fair. No guarantee of the rate for the day. They aren't promised a denarius since part of the day is gone. So they had to trust the landowner's fairness. Third, there are the workers at noon. They get the same deal as the workers at 9. Fourth, there's the workers at 3. They get the same deal as the workers at 9. Fifth, there are the workers that show up about 5, which meant they could only work for about an hour. In that case, most of the day was done. From the standpoint of the landowner, this represents wasted time and potential. But they are ready to work, and that's good. They're offered a job, that's good. They aren't promised anything at all. These men worked the least, but they went out without any kind of promise whatsoever. They had no way of knowing what the landowner would do. They probably figured they would just get a tiny bit since they could only work a portion of the day. So it was about grace for them. They were just trusting the landowner. Before we go any further, we can say this much about the landowner. He had lots of work, he had lots of money, and he had lots of compassion. That's the kind of guy you want to work for. He could have ignored these men, picked them up on another day, but he didn't. They were hired, and it was simply an act of grace. Now, there are two big surprises in this story. When the day's work was done, comes time for people to get paid. They like to be paid. You like to be paid after a day's work. Immediately, something unusual happens. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going to the first. Now, this is unusual, but it was not unheard of. Perhaps, he wanted to use pocket change to pay the guys who had just been working for an hour and save the big money for the guys who worked all day. But the landowner has something more in mind. He pays the last group first in order to reveal the hidden motives of mind. Only the first group had a contract. The others worked by faith. Surprise number one, he is generous. That's a surprise in our society when people are generous. The landowner wants to show them how generous he could be if they would simply trust him. And here comes the kicker. When those who were hired about the 11th hour came, and they received a denarius, they were not so happy. When the first guys got a denarius, they said, whoa! If they got a denarius for working 1 hour and we worked 12 hours, see, that'd be 1, 2, that'd be like 12 denarius. Yeah, this is going to be a good day. That's how they reasoned in their mind. It's not what happened. You see, the surprise for them was that they had a contract and the master kept his word. Surprise number two. You had a contract. You agreed to do something, and you did it for that. And when those who were hired first came, they thought they would receive more. Did you get that? They thought they would receive more. Not what the contract said. It's what they thought. So I asked myself, how do I feel about that? I think I felt the same way these guys felt. They began to grumble against the landowner, and to be honest, I sympathize with them. I've been in their shoes. I've worked hard. I've sacrificed. I've done my job. I've kept my bargain. I've taken losses. And then some airhead walks us in at the end of the day and speeds by you at 95 miles an hour, and you have to eat his dust. The last worked for 1 hour. You have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. They're grumbling, and I've done it too. See, what is at the heart of their complaint? Two things. If you just count the hours worked, they're not equal. Well, one worked 12, one worked 1. That's not equal. It's not that they minded the latecomers getting paid. They didn't mind that. It's not that they minded the latecomers coming and getting a denarius. They didn't mind that. But they thought they would receive more. That's my problem. And that's why they grumbled, and that's why I grumbled. There's a process that goes on here when they're getting paid. I want you to notice the process. First, there was the observation. They saw what was happening. They got in their eye for 1 hour. That's good. So what did that do? That changed their expectations. They assumed they would be paid more. And finally, there's the detonation. Boom! I mean, they blow up. They are hot. They are mad. That's not fair! I screamed. That's not fair! I've gone through this process many, many times. Their complaint sounds good on its face value, but it's based on a human standard of comparison. Ultimately, they weren't complaining against the other workers, no. Their beef was with the landowner. But the man had hired them in the first place, and without him, they wouldn't have had a job at all, right? They didn't have to hire him. He chose to do that. And for the groups that were hired at 9 and 12 and 3, he never promised to pay them anything except what was fair, which he did. And when I grumble, it reflects so badly on my character. God, forgive me for grumbling. On one level, it's hard not to feel sympathy for these workers. Same things happen to me. I work hard and somebody else gets the credit. Or I work just as hard as somebody else and they get more credit. Or I work much harder and we get equal credit. Life is like that. And I find myself secretly cheering for these workers, saying, stand up for your rights, man. Don't let that boss push you around like that. That's why Jesus told the story. He knew I would instinctively root for the wrong thing. So what is the root cause of my grumbling? It's envy. A belief that others are getting what they do not deserve, and I am not getting what I deserve. I root for the wrong side because I think I am like the early group that showed up and worked all day long. I think because I was saved at 17 years old by the grace of God, and I've worked for Jesus every day the rest of my life, somehow I figure like I was in the first group. So I go out from here brimming with confidence, ready to go to work, and as pure motives as I can muster up. I work hard, I sweat, I toil in the heat of the sun, I bear the burden of the work, I try to do my best, and then the road gets bumpy, and I gripe and I groan and I complain. But let me say something crucial. At this point, as I pray through my anger and my pride, my problem is not with my fellow workers. My problem's with God. Here's what I'm really angry with. I'm angry with Him because He's generous. Does it make sense? When you finally boil it all down, grumbling is only a symptom of a much deeper systemic problem than even envy. You see, I have a problem with God. I'm mad at God because I think He was better to somebody else than He was to me. In the final analysis, Jesus told this story to teach me something about God. I may think that when I look at my life, I am getting justice while someone else is getting grace. That's how the world is. I think I'm like the 6 a.m. laborer who showed up early, who worked all day, who would not be idle, who was determined to work hard. But that's not how God sees it. God views it like I'm the guy there at 5 o'clock. And I showed up late for the party. It was His grace that let me work it off. You see, for those men, their reward is comes from two things. First of all, I overestimate my own importance. Secondly, I underestimate the grace of God. And I am good at both of those things. The parable is not just teaching about final rewards. It is also probing at the level of my motives. Why am I doing what I do? If it's a straightforward reward that I want, God said, I'll pay you. I'll pay you exactly what I guarantee to pay you. God will never cheat me, but that's all I'll get, and I'll go to heaven grumbling all the way. But if I decide to work for the Lord's sake, I'll never be disappointed. It's motives. So, what is the cure for the grumbling heart? And this is where I had to spend some time just working through this on my own. What is the cure for my grumbling heart? There are several things that the text suggests. First of all, thank God for the blessings I have already experienced. The longer I serve the Lord, the more critical this seems to be to me. Before I grumble today, I choose to thank God for His blessings first. The men who worked all day then felt cheated. They felt forgotten, like the landowner came along and didn't offer them a job at all. What's up with that? He offered you the job. How much better and more noble would it have been for them to say, thank God, than he gave me a job. And for me to say, thank God for what He's already given me. Second cure for my grumbling heart is don't judge myself by the way God treats somebody else. See, this is my real heart problem. When I'm grumbling, I can't keep my eyes off of the more fortunate. Looking at others always gets me in trouble. Remember, Mike, God isn't obligated to treat everyone alike. Where's that in the Bible? That everybody's going to be treated alike. He isn't bound by my holier-than-thou standard of fairness. If He chooses to bless someone more obviously than He blesses me, that's God's business. God can deliver my neighbor from cancer, and I can die of cancer, and God can still be fair. Envying my neighbor because he has something I don't have is a waste of time, because God treats us as individuals, not as groups. A truth is, He might do for me exactly what He's done for somebody else. Or He might do more or less for me than He's done for somebody else. Or He might do something entirely different for me than He's done for somebody else. God can deal with me anyway He chooses. And remember, Mike, that God rewards faithfulness. We live in a world focused on production. What's the bottom line? How many new calls did you make this week? How many books have you written? How many degrees do you have? Have you gotten that promotion? How's your career going? It's easy to bring that thinking over into the church. We tend to reduce the Christian life into the mechanical process. How much did you pray today? How much did you read your Bible today? How much did you fast this week? How much? And we think it equals a certain reward. I am production oriented. You might be too. That's the way the world looks at things. You're either producing or you're fired. But God's point of view is different. The world says, look at production. The Lord inspects the motive. The world says, what did you do? God says, why did you do it? The world says, what's the bottom line? God says, were you doing it for me? The world says, show me your stuff. God says, show me your heart. Here's the truth. I cannot tell by looking at others where I stand with the Lord. That's what Jesus means when He says, the last will be first, the first will be last. Some people in this life appear to have it all together, and they're going to be sitting on the back row in heaven. While others who seem to have accomplished very little will be the bright stars in heaven. This parable teaches equality, not of opportunity, but of faithfulness. It's a wonderful antidote to grumbling to think of it in this way. God is just. I will not be underpaid. God is generous. I will be surprised. If we want justice, then I can get it and I'll grumble all the way. If I want grace, I have to remember that I was idle before God called me out of the marketplace. It was only by grace that He called me. And by faith that He gave me that I responded. Good news is, my friends, the Master is coming to the marketplace looking for laborers. There's more than enough work. There's more than enough effort and energy that needs to be put into this. He's looking for volunteers. And the good news is we don't have to worry about the salary. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. No one's ever been laid off. Nobody's ever been disappointed. The question is, what opportunity has God given to me? And how will I work for Him in the marketplace? Because here's the truth. Jesus has called you and me into His will. Would you pray with me? Lord, it is sobering to think that you were talking about me in this parable. Lord, we want to be good laborers. We want to work an honest day for an honest day's wages. But Lord, when it's all said and done, it really is about grace. We've not earned it. But we are grateful for the opportunity to go to work tomorrow, that we might bring you honor and glory. Thank you for being a generous God. Thank you for doing for people individually and not as a group. That you get to do what you want. Lord, I stand here as a servant who has been unusually blessed. And during this season of Thanksgiving, I just want to say thank you. Purify my heart, purify my motives, that my thank you might be pleasing and acceptable in your sight. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Would you stand with us?